Okay, so the state abbreviator challenge, it basically just gives you this index.js, which is, I mean, it could have been JSON or something else, but basically just a list of states. So we have that. I've cloned the project down right here. So I have that state data, and I need to create a React project. So I will use this command npx create React app, and then I can give it I believe I'm going to try this. I believe you can, since I'm already in a folder called state abbreviator, I think that's a good name for this app. So I want to see if I can get away with not creating another folder with a similar name. Yeah, okay. I'll try that. This will take a couple minutes. So has anyone been messing around with hooks at all? Did I see any nods? Jim, are you nodding?
Learned about
Yes.
use state.
Okay. So Jim, can you tell us a little bit about hooks and your experience?
I didn't do a whole lot of like class-based components when I have messed around with React, because I think when I first tried it out, they were doing functional with hooks. So all I've done is like the React tutorial and a couple of other experiments, but it seems like with hooks, it just makes your components a lot smaller and cleaner. And I think once you get used to it, it's a lot easier, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, we'll see some of that when we get to the lifecycle methods. We'll talk about lifecycle methods with class components, but React hooks kind of compress. So that there are a lot of different lifecycle methods, and oftentimes they get used in sets like pairs or triplets, and React hooks can kind of, you can do something in one hook that would have taken you 2 or 3 lifecycle methods to do. All right, so this is loaded up. I'm gonna go cd and npm start. Okay, so that's working. Everything's installed and set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have this, I really don't need to worry about any of this other stuff, but I just need to move this index.html or index.js. So I have index.js, yeah. So in the source, I'll just put the state data, or we could just change the name of the file so it doesn't conflict and then import it in there. But so now we have our this state data file here. The rest of our app should still work fine. And so that's like the basic setup. So the basic setup is now done. So what we need to do is we need to make something that basically has a drop-down menu that's populated with all of the state names from that list that we got, or the array that we got. And then we need to basically show, so we'll have maybe an H1 or something like that shows the abbreviation for the currently selected state. So we think about how we could design this from a React perspective. One way, the kind of maybe naive way, would be just to put everything inside app. So this is a pretty small thing, right? So we could get away with putting everything in app. It would be, 30 lines or something like that. So that wouldn't be such a big deal. But we're not going to do that. So we'll kind of pretend that this is maybe a slightly larger project. So if we think about what's basically the smallest units we could break this up into. How can we break this up into components? So we have our app. So we're always going to have our app component, which could do different things, but basically is going to be like a container for everything else. And then we need a drop-down menu. So that could be its own component. And we're going to need a component to display the abbreviation. So that could be another component. So I think, initially, probably a good idea to split it up into 2 components. You could, you can always make adjustments later, but so we'll start with 2 components. I'm going to clear out all this junk. And I'm going to give this a title. If I misspell abbreviator, which I think I have, please forgive me. Yeah, I'm a terrible speller. So I'm just going to do that. If anyone wants to jump in with a correction.
I think there's an I in there somewhere, but I'll have to look it up too. I did have to Google it.
I kind of like that though. It sounds like something that eats abbreves.
Abbreviator. Yeah.
You should just abbreviate abbreviator.
There you go. That's the real solution there. I should have done that right off the bat, so no one knew what a terrible speller I am. And then also, is it ABRV or ABBR? I don't. What's the? All right, so let's check this. No, it's not going to go away. Okay, so so I have my title now. We'll come back here, and so we want to have 2 components. So I'm going to go again. We could just add. So one, I think maybe like the worst idea, although not terrible still, is to put everything in app. The next maybe worse idea is to just put maybe another file here, or each component in a file. What we'll do is we'll create a folder for components. And we'll put all our components in here, and we could create subfolders in here. I won't do that, but you can, however you want to organize it. So the first thing will be, I'll call it display. And that is going to display whatever result I get. And then another component will be called dropdown. It's going to be the dropdown menu. So I'm going to write class components. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and change this. Is by default a function component. So I'm going to change this into a class component. I guess I'll leave the CSS. So import, I'll import components. Class app extends component. So you get all of the React functionality. And then because it's a class, we can't simply return. So we need to have a render method. And then in there, we can just return. And then the export still works because we kept the name the same. So this should work just like before. So that is working. Okay, so we have our class component here. And let's get the display component. So I'm gonna do the same thing. So import you get tired of doing this, by the way, you can, there's a React shortcuts, I forget what it's called, but if you look in the VS Code store, so you can type something like RCC for React class component, and it will do all of this boilerplate for you. So just so you're aware of it. It's probably good to type it out for the first couple days, but if that starts to become annoying. All right, so import component from React. Class display extends component, and we'll get a render and return. And just to have a dummy value here, and then export it. All right, and then we'll get this other component here. Drop down, do the same thing. Import. Okay, import component from React, and then class drop down. And our render method, return JSX. And I'll export it. Okay, so all that stuff is set up now. So if we want to actually see these, we're going to have to import them into the app.js and then stick them inside the what app returns. So I'm going to import display from components display, then import drop down from components drop down. And because I've exported that, I can actually use those things. So how do I include display and drop down here?
You'll add them with the JSX. It looks like a HTML tag.
Yes, yeah.
With just with the name of the class, yeah.
Okay, so display, and then we'll do drop down. All right, let's take a look. And it looks like I have the skeleton working. So we have state abbreviator, and then this is a component, and this is a component. And we can take a look at the dev tools just to make sure that we're doing what we think we're doing. So we have the app, the top level, has two children, display, and drop down. All right, so if we think about, so we need to have a drop down menu, so we could take care of that right off the bat. So where should we, so we have this data that we need to use, or we can use from, what is it? State data. So state data index.js. Where should we import that?
An app.
Okay, so you could import it in app. So why app?
That way, you don't have to import it multiple times. You can use it in app so that display and dropdown can access it from as props.
Okay. So if we put it at the top level, we can import it once and then pass it down to components as needed. Okay, that could work. Would anyone have a different argument? So it would also be possible to put it in a, let's say, just the drop down component, to import it into the drop down component, and then I mean, pass information up. You can't really pass information up, but you can have a callback that would change the state here. So app could potentially gain access to that information, even if we imported it and drop down. So yeah, we'll import it into app, although you know, there's more than one way to do this. So import, we'll call it state from state data / index. Okay, so we have this state data, which I assume is working. Could try console logging it maybe. So looks like that is working. So that's available to us now. So how do so I want the drop down menu to have this state data.
Just call props to get it in.
Yeah, so so how would I do that? So I can do something with props.
Props dot this dot whatever the name of it's going to be.
Okay.
I'm completely wrong.
No, okay, so so we do need to use props, but here we're at the top level. So app has basically direct access to this data. So app doesn't need to do anything with props. It doesn't have. So if we look at our developer tools and the components, you can see the app, it doesn't have any props. We're not giving it any props yet, but it can still access the state data. So what we need to do is pass it down as props from the app where we have access to it into dropdown. So we can call this, I'll just call it data. So now when this app component renders, drop down, it's passing this keyword argument, basically data, to drop down, and this data argument is going to get attached to the props object that comes with every component. So now if we look at drop down, it has props. It has this data prop because we called it data. And then within, so now we have this data available to us in props. So how do we access that data from the dropdown component?
Props.data.state data.
Okay. Yeah, can you say it one more time?
Props.data.state data.
Yeah,
Or, sorry, props.state .data.
Yeah, so props, yeah, this is kind of a bad example because state we're talking about state abbreviator, and then we have React state. So if we're in a class and we want to access props, we have to start with this because that's something that belongs to the class. So it'll be this dot props, and then it's just whatever we named it when we passed it down. So this dot props dot data will give us the contents right there. You can test that out by console logging it. And we see that we're drop down is logging this. So now we have access to that data right there. What if we don't want to call it this dot props dot data? Maybe just too much typing, or there's a lot of things in the props or whatever. Is there any shortcut we can use?
I think there's a shortcut that starts with the curly braces data,
Yep.
and then is it equals this dot props maybe?
Yeah. So what is that called? What is that process? I don't know what you call it. What is that thing called?
I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically just getting it
Okay.
from this dot props.
Yeah. So it's called destructuring. So you do const, and then we can. So props is an object, so we can pull out data. So you could do that, and then when we refer to it, we can simply call it data, and that should also be logged there. So you'll see this kind of thing a lot. Okay.
What's the benefit of that? Instead of typing 2 lines of code, you type, instead of typing 1 line of code, you type 2.
Yeah.
I just don't get the benefit of it.
Yeah. So part of it is convenience, and part of it is you can like basically simplify it. When you have more complicated components with lots of things going on, you can kind of offload some of that complexity instead of doing this dot props dot whatever, this dot props dot whatever all the time in your code. You just do it once up here, and then so it's purely a convenience. Yeah. But it is something that's very commonly used in React. So you should
If you
know what it is.
If you wanted to rename it, would you just have to do another line that's data equals whatever, or const variable name equals data? Or is there another way to do
I
that?
think you could do that, but well, since this is a constant, so you could make it use let and do that. You can also do this. So you can kind of rename it as you're destructuring it. And that should get the same thing when you refresh.
What if you wanted to pass in 2 arguments? If there's 2 props being passed in, how would you get to that?
Yeah, you can do. So let's then we go to the drop down. So we should be able to do this. And that shows up there. You can also do the same thing if you wanted to rename other prop into something else. Or if you didn't want to do that, you could just do, this dot props dot data and this dot props dot other prop. You don't even have to comment that out, but it does the same thing. So it's just it's just a convenience, but it's a commonly used convenience. Okay. So in the drop down, what we want to do is, so we have this drop down, which we don't actually want to have. So we need to have a drop down menu, which is a select. So it's like select with options. And you could look this up. React has its own way of doing forms, and there's also libraries out there. There's tons of libraries for React that handle things. So just so you know, you're not by any you're definitely not stuck with just with what React gives you by default. So what I'm going to do here is, because I don't know, I guess this number of states is somewhat fixed, but we don't know exactly, let's say we don't know exactly how many states, and we don't want to hard code that anyway. So we will just put the select as kind of a wrapper, and then we'll write a function that will generate all of the options. Select. So we have select here, and then we're going to have, we'll write a function up here called create options. And do that. I'll just make it an arrow function. The only time you really need to worry about making arrow function is basically when you're using callbacks. Other than that, it shouldn't make any difference. So we'll create options, and then so we have access to our props. So what we can do is we have all the states. So let's look at our data real quick. Where are we? So this is an array of objects, and each object has a name and then an alpha -2 key. So we're going to want to populate each item in each option with the name. So what we can do is we can use map. You can use a for loop or anything else, but I'll just use map, and we'll generate an array of options. This dot props dot data, and then we will dot map, and then this will be a state info something. And what we want to return is an option, or a whole bunch of options. So option. And then our options will have basically like something that the end user will see. We'll put that here. So state info dot name. And we'll just try this for now. So I'm going to put this in here. And we can do any JavaScript thing in here. So I'm going to call this function this dot create options. And let's see if that works. Okay, so we have our display here. We have a warning here. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop, so we can take care of that. So let's give each of these and we'll do does the index go first or second? Can't remember. No.
Second for me.
Okay. And then I'll just do this. So you just want to get something unique here. So you could just use the index, but if you have multiple components with the same index. Okay, so that warning goes away. And now we have this drop-down menu that doesn't do anything. Okay, so we have this drop-down menu that doesn't do anything. We should also, if we look at the elements, let's see, in the app, we have the select, and we have options, but what we need is a value. So the value will be the actual abbreviation. So I'm going to do that. So to get the abbreviation, we'll do state. And then I believe because I don't think the dash is going to work. So alpha -2. So we can't do this with JavaScript. So is there a solution? Are we just unable to grab this? Oh, first off, it's not called state, sorry. Will this work?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So as JavaScript does, it still works even though it doesn't do what we want it to. So how can we grab this value? It has this not legal character in it.
Can you do it with the square brackets?
Yes. Yeah. Now we have the actual abbreviations here. All right, so that's looking a lot better. So now we have this, nothing happens really. So what we need to do is add an event listener, the React equivalent of an event listener here. And we'll listen for the onChange event, the change event. And then we're going to need some kind of function to run. So if we want to change something to call a function, that almost always means changing state. Because a state change will trigger a re-render. So whatever new information or whatever we have will get shown then. So have we painted ourselves into a wall here, or? So the problem we're having, at least so far, is that we have we have these two components and they're sister components, and we want to share information between these two, right? So when the drop down changes, so someone selects a state from the drop down menu, we want that change, to be reflected in this display component. But we can't pass information from one sister to another.
So we'll have to pass it back up to app and then back down to the display.
Yeah. So, even though like the change is occurring in this component, we're going to have to actually make the change in a common parent, which in this case is app. So app now is going to have state. So even though app itself doesn't need to change, that information needs to be available to two child components. So state, and let's do so the initial value, we can do whatever we want. I'll just do something like ultimately this will end up being an abbreviation. So we have state here, and if we look at the drop down, we need to add an event listener. So we have state here, which means that we're going to need to be able to change the state here. So I'm going to add a function here. So handle I'm going to just to reduce the amount of states talking about. Okay, so handle abbreviation change. This is ultimately going to come from this drop down. So this is an event, which means that it's going to get passed an event. So we'll include that here. We're going to have to look out for an event, and we're going to change our current state, which we don't do directly, but we use this. We use this method, this.set state, and we can pass it an object. So current abbreviation is event.target.value. And we can do that because in the drop down, we included the actual abbreviation here.
Can we call value whatever we want, or is that like a keyword?
I think it's a keyword. There's there may be a way to. I think you can have custom attributes, but yeah, I haven't really tried doing anything differently. Okay, so we have obviously this is not working right now, but we have state now, and we have this state changing function. So how do we get drop down menu to change the state of the parent component app?
Pass your handler as a prop.
Yeah. So we have to, from app down to the child, we have to give the child this function because this function will change the state here. So we can copy this, and I'm going to get rid of other prop here. We can call this whatever we want, but I'm just going to give it the same name. Okay, so we're going to pass this function down. And when we do that, we can go to the drop down and we can access it through the props, right? So this dot props dot handle abbreviation change. So let's see if this works. So first off, I'm going to check the dev tools. So the drop down has two props, has data, and this handle abbreviation change function. Display, we haven't done anything with. App has state, and that's it. So if we change to California, our display isn't changing, but if we're looking at our dev tools, we can see that the state of app has changed. So we clicked on California, and then the state changed. We click on Idaho, this will update as well. So we're using that callback. So the callback from dropdown, which really belongs to app. App is kind of letting dropdown call it, and that when dropdown calls app's handle abbreviation change function, it changes app's state, which then triggers a re-render, which we will use to pass down props to display. So let's move on to display, and we'll just leave this here for now. So app, we want display to display whatever the current abbreviation is. So we can do that here. We can do that will be this dot state dot current abbreviation. So I don't want this to be confusing. So this is the state, but we're passing it down as a prop. So here, this is a state, but when we pass it down, display will consume this as a prop. So we've got abbreviation goes here. I'm going to do, just add this. So you can access this, this dot props dot abbreviation. We can see that we're getting that current value. So if I choose Arkansas, that now updates. And of course we could, if we wanted to, let's just destructure this for no real reason. So const and we can just do that, and that should work just the same. So any questions about that? So because display is basically dependent on what happens in dropdown, because these are sister components, we have to pull that state up into a common parent. which in this case is app. So that means that if we originally had, state and the callback or the event listener with a callback, here in dropdown, we would have to pull that up into the common parent, put that there, and then pass down the callback to dropdown, and then display gets, usually it gets whatever the state of the parent is as a prop.
When the state gets passed down, is it the same object or same memory value like we were looking at a long time ago?
It should be, yeah. That's a good question. With JavaScript, doing that kind of introspection is not, I don't think that it's possible. It may be, yeah, you can get the actual address in Python and JavaScript. I've tried looking, I remember a while ago I tried doing that and wasn't able to do it. So it might be possible.
But for all intents and purposes, it's the same state.
Yeah, it's the same state, but it doesn't work as state in the display component. So when display consumes this, it doesn't matter where it came from. It's just a prop.
Oh, okay.
So just like in dropdown, we passed in, did we end up passing that? Yeah, we passed in, so from app, we're passing in the state data to dropdown. So dropdown doesn't know or care that this came from a file or anything else. It's just a prop that it has. So it doesn't know or care where it came from. It's just a prop. And you can't actually change the prop. It's a read-only value. So even if we want, if you wanted to like somehow change the value here, which would maybe somehow trigger an update in the state, it doesn't work that way. Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could pass the entire state in one prop, or all the values without writing them all out as this dot state dot whatever we're calling it.
Yeah, I think let's just try doing this dot state, and let me add another thing just for. So then we go into display. So I'm going to destructure that. Let's see, ABBV and other. Yeah. So
were you passing the whole state as ABBV in your yeah, if you go back to data equals state,
right.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so let me do everything.
So then you would need this dot props dot everything there. Yeah, that makes sense.
Let me see. Stop props dot everything. Let me try.
I think you missed an N in everything. There you go.
Oh, I'm putting this in. This is where you do that. current abbrev. Yeah, sorry. I was using the other name. So yeah. Okay. All right, so I did want to show you guys functional components. It's not, shouldn't be too time consuming. I know we're approaching an hour, but I'll try to do this relatively quickly. All right, so we'll start with display will be the easy one. The easiest one. So we have a class here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out. I'll just comment everything out. And I'm going to rewrite this using some copy pasting as a functional component. So I can do, we can write functions a lot of different ways. So do it like this. So we have this display function, and I'm going to export that. And then there's no render method here. It's just one function, but there is going to be a return value. So I'm going to copy that. We're going to have to return something. And what we want to return here is the props. So unlike a class component, so class component, you get this dot props for free. It's, it's invisible. It's there because you're inheriting from component. Display, it's a function, so you need to give a name to the props. So you can call this whatever you want, but just call it props because that's what everyone does. So props, and then we have access to props here. Props, not this, but it's not a class, so just props dot, what did we end up calling? Let me change this dot state dot. So one thing to notice is that, okay, first off, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Sounds like it's a different thing, but it's really pretty much the same. The other thing is that you can mix and match functional components and class-based components. So the rest of my app is class-based components, and I have this functional component. So I can just change them one at a time without having to rewrite everything all at once. So we got this. Any questions about that? Okay, let's rewrite the dropdown. It will be similarly painless, I think. So drop down. And I'm going to export. I'm going to copy this return value. And this, I'm going to need props. So I think this is coming down from props. And then this other thing, which is going to generate the contents here. So we just get rid of a couple of things that make it a class. There's no this or anything. We can have this be a function, or we can, set it, use an anonymous function, setting it equal to the name. Either one or fine. And then we call that here, and that should also work just like it was before.
There was still a this in the create options.
Thank you. I don't know if we changed any other names there. Let's see. Okay. Looks like that's working still. Again, nothing really different there. Everything is basically the same. You just have to, a lot of it is just removing this. Where it gets a little different is when you need to start doing things like state. So let's handle that. And I'm going to copy this return. Okay, those imports should look the same. So I can't just include state here. So if I try doing this, I mean, I could name it, could do this, but it's not going to work. So I'm going to have to import a hook. I'm going to have to use a hook, and that hook is going to be called use state. And I can import that from React. So I'm already importing component, which I no longer need, but I'm going to keep it there just in case. So use state. A whole bunch of hooks usually start with use. So the way this works is you're also going to use destructuring here. This is the standard thing to do. So use hook will return two things. It will return it returns your current state, the specific thing, and then it also returns a way to update the state. So I'll just show you. So const, we use the destructuring syntax. So it'll be an array. And we can give this whatever name we want. In this case, this is, we'll use this name, current abbreviation. And then the standard convention is to call this function. So the first thing is the actual state itself, like the state, the item of state. And the second thing is the function. So you call it set, and then whatever that other value is. So current. Okay, so that equals use state. And just like with put this down here for a second. So just like here, we can have basically a kind of, it's like a default initial value we can include here. We can do the same thing here. So I'm gonna paste that in there. So that will be, this is where we're going to get our initial default value. So this call to use state, the first time, basically current abbreviation is going to equal whatever's in here. And then if I want to change that, I'm going to call this function. Okay. So instead of this dot state dot current abbreviation, now I can just access it directly. And then if I want to change that, so here we're passing a wrapper, which is fine. So let's create a function called handle abbreviation change and get rid of the this. So this is going to take the event, and then we call set current we should be able to pass in e.target.value. So let's make sure this works real quick. So this still works. And if we look at our components, we have this function that we're still passing down as a prop. Display is getting this prop, and app has state, but it's a hook.
So what is the actual hook in all of that? What is hook the name of? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
Is it-
yeah, hook is just kind of a general term for something that basically there are a whole sequence of events that are going to happen, you know, behind the scenes that React is doing, and you can hook into them. Basically, you can say, I want to intervene at this point, and there's a function that allows you to do that. So you call that function or override that function or whatever, and then you can make some change during the whole like cycle of what's happening. So a hook is basically like a point of intervention. You hook into some specific event, usually in a series of events.
And it's not ever, so if you're using a functional component like this, is there actually a state? It looks like there is because of the name of the hook use state, but we're not actually ever calling anything state. Is it creating something called state somewhere that's using current abbreviation and the please choose state value?
Yeah, I don't actually know what React itself is doing. I doubt that there's anything called state. I mean, this is a function, so you can't, one of the, you know, you can't really like reuse functions, unlike a class where you can, you know, you can provide a lot of attributes, and when you create instances, they all have these attributes. You can't really do that with functions. But what's happening, even with this.setState, you're not directly changing. When you call this.setState, even on a class component, you're not just directly changing it. You're basically handing it off to whatever React stuff is happening. And then the React itself will decide when and if to actually update that state.
Would it be fair to say it's kind of like holding whatever the current state is over here while like the state is still whatever it was set to at the beginning, like the default?
So there's a whole process for actually updating everything, and there isn't, it's not guaranteed that that state will necessarily be updated every single time. So React will batch, it can and does batch re-renders. So it's trying to be efficient. That's something to keep in mind, and we haven't really talked about set state. So set state can take a direct value. It can also take a callback. So if we don't have to get into this now, but we might talk about it in the coming weeks. But if you want to change the state based on your current state, then that can be an issue, because there isn't a guarantee. It's not guaranteed that everything's going to be immediately like, I changed the state, so it re-rendered, and that's my current state. Sometimes it's delayed, so you might have stale values there. So what you do is you use a callback instead of just directly changing it. And then in the functional, that doesn't directly translate into hooks, into the functional version. There's another hook that you actually would use called use effect, which is the other. So use state and use effect are the two hooks that you'll use all the time.
Is that effect with an E?
Yes.
I had one more question about functional versus class-based components like this. Just so there's no render. It doesn't need the render function to be called like a
Yeah, there's no method in a function, so you can't. Yeah.
Because
I mean,
it's a function, it's already.
Yeah, I mean you can
Yeah.
write other functions in a function like I'm doing here.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's no like inherited.
But-
it's not inheriting a function called render.
Yeah, but the class needs that because the class isn't really doing anything until a function is called. Is that right? And then so renders what gets called, the function that gets called when you're using the classes.
Yeah,
right?
again, I don't know exactly what React is doing under this. Unlike Django, the source code for React is extremely confusing to me. So I don't know exactly what React is doing here. But you know, it's not exactly equivalent, but from the perspective of you as a developer, you can think of them as doing the same thing. Okay. So for the challenge for today, not the mute button. So there's another README which walks through some of the stuff. So feel free to take a look at that. And yeah, why don't we say, yeah, I'd like you guys to work in pairs for whack-a-mole. Would you prefer to have like 20 minutes to go over the README, or if you want to just go into the challenge? If you would like to wait, why don't you DM me and I'll create the pairs in a sec. You can take a break, I'll create the pairs. If you DM me, then I'll maybe put you with someone else who also wants to do that. Okay.